I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd spit in a tube and mail it off to some company, but there I was on Christmas morning 2023, holding a DNA kit my daughter had given me. She was always curious about our family history, always asking questions I couldn't answer. My parents died young, and I grew up knowing almost nothing about where I came from. "Just do it, Dad," she said, rolling her eyes at my hesitation. "What's the worst that could happen? You find out you're related to someone famous." I laughed it off, but something made me actually follow through a few days later. Maybe it was turning 75 that year. Maybe it was realizing how little time I might have left to understand my own story. My name is Gabriel, and for most of my life I thought I knew exactly who I was. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, raised by parents who loved me, but never talked much about the past. I went to college, got drafted in 1968, served my time in Vietnam, came home, got married, had kids, built a quiet life as an accountant. Normal, unremarkable, safe. I buried a lot of things from Vietnam deep down where they couldn't hurt anyone, including myself. My wife Linda knew not to ask too many questions about those years, and I was grateful for that. We had 42 good years together before cancer took her in 2015. After she died, I moved in with my daughter Rebecca and her family. I spent my days reading, taking walks, playing with my grandkids, waiting for nothing in particular. The DNA results came back 6 weeks later. Rebecca called me into her home office, her face strange, somewhere between excited and concerned. "Dad," she said, "you need to see this." She turned her laptop screen toward me, and I saw the words that would change everything. Close family match, predicted relationship, half-sibling, shared DNA, 24.8%. I stared at the name. Miles Donovan, age 76, lives in San Francisco, California. I had a brother, or a half-brother. At 75 years old, I suddenly had a sibling I never knew existed. My hands were shaking. Rebecca was already talking, rapid fire, about how this happened sometimes, how people discovered siblings through these tests, how we should reach out, but I couldn't hear her properly. My mind was spinning backward through my entire life, rewriting everything I thought I knew. My father, the quiet man who worked at the hardware store and came home every night smelling like sawdust and metal, had another son. Or my mother, who died when I was 12, had given up a child before she married my father. I felt dizzy with the possibilities, with the betrayal of it, with the sudden sense that my whole life had been built on incomplete information. Rebecca sent Miles a message through the DNA site. Just a simple introduction. "Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I'm writing on behalf of my father Gabriel. It appears you and he are half-siblings. He'd very much like to connect with you if you're open to that." We waited. 3 days felt like 3 years. I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at his profile picture, trying to see my own features in his face. He had dark hair gone mostly grey, kind eyes, a gentle smile. He looked like someone I might have passed on the street 1,000 times without knowing we shared blood. When Miles replied, his message was brief but warm. "Gabriel, I've been hoping someone from my biological family would show up on one of these tests for 20 years. I'd love to talk. Here's my phone number. Call any time." My hand hovered over my phone for an hour before I finally dialed. The phone rang twice, and then I heard his voice for the first time. "Gabriel?" he said, and something in my chest cracked open. "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, it's me." There was a pause, and then he laughed, soft and a little broken. "I can't believe this is real." "Me neither," I said. We talked for 3 hours that first night. Miles told me his story, and I felt like I was listening to a ghost describe an alternate version of my own life. He was born in 1947, a year before me. His mother, our mother, was only 17. She gave him up for adoption because her family wouldn't support her, because it was what you did back then when you were young and unmarried and pregnant. He grew up in Sacramento with adoptive parents who loved him, who told him the truth about his origins from the beginning. He'd always known he was adopted, always wondered about his biological family, but the records were sealed. For decades, he had no way to find answers. I told him about our mother. Her name was Dorothy, I said. She died when I was 12. Breast cancer. I don't remember her talking much about her life before she married my dad. There was a long silence on the other end. Dorothy, Miles repeated like he was tasting the name for the first time. What was she like? I tried to describe her, but my memories were so faded filtered through the fog of childhood and 50-plus years of distance. She was kind, quiet. She made the best apple pie I've ever had. She sang while she did dishes. It felt inadequate, trying to summarize a whole person in a few sentences, trying to give him something when I had so little to offer. Miles asked about our father next, and I had to tell him the truth. I don't know if we share a father, I said. My dad, the man who raised me, was named Robert. But if you were born in 47 and I was born in 48, and Mum was 17 when she had you, then the timeline doesn't quite work. Miles was quiet, processing. So we're half-siblings through Dorothy, he said. But we might not share a father. Right, I confirmed. I felt a strange guilt about this, like I was taking something away from him by not being able to offer a complete family tree. We talked every few days after that. Long phone calls that rambled through our lives, comparing notes, finding the strange coincidences and the stark differences. We'd both served in Vietnam, though at different times and in different capacities. We'd both come home changed, carrying things we didn't talk about. We'd both gotten married, had children, built quiet middle-class lives. We both liked coffee black, old westerns and crossword puzzles. We both had the same slightly crooked smile that we must have inherited from Dorothy. With every conversation, I felt like I was recovering a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. 3 months into our phone friendship, Miles suggested we meet in person. I'm 76 years old, Gabriel, he said. I don't know how much time either of us has left. I'd really like to look my brother in the eye. The word brother hit me hard. I'd been an only child my whole life, and suddenly I wasn't. Rebecca immediately started planning, booking flights, finding hotels. She was more excited than I was, or maybe I was just more terrified. What if we met and didn't actually like each other? What if the connection we'd built over the phone disappeared in person? What if seeing him just made me angry at our mother for keeping secrets, at my father for never telling me the truth, at the whole universe for waiting so long to bring us together? We arranged to meet in Chicago, neutral territory, halfway between us. Rebecca came with me, moral support and photographer and witness. The plan was to meet at a restaurant near Navy Pier on a Saturday afternoon in May. I barely slept the night before. I changed my shirt 3 times that morning. Rebecca kept telling me to relax, that it was going to be wonderful, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I felt like I was about to take the most important test of my life and I hadn't studied for it. We got to the restaurant 15 minutes early. I ordered coffee I didn't drink and watched the door like my life depended on it. And then he walked in, and I knew him immediately. Not just from his profile picture, but from something deeper. He had Dorothy's eyes. He had her way of holding his shoulders. He scanned the room, and when his gaze landed on me, he smiled. And it was like looking in a mirror that showed me who I might have been if my life had gone differently. I stood up, and he walked over, and for a moment we just stood there looking at each other. Then he held out his hand, formal and uncertain, and I ignored it and pulled him into a hug. He hugged me back hard and I felt his shoulders shake and I realized we were both crying. 2 old men in a Chicago restaurant holding on to each other like we were afraid the other might disappear. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I don't know why I'm such a mess. I couldn't answer because I was too busy being a mess myself. We sat down and talked for hours. Rebecca took pictures, ordered food we barely touched, and mostly left us alone to navigate this strange new relationship. Miles brought photos, old pictures from his childhood, and I brought the few I had of Dorothy. We laid them out on the table between us like puzzle pieces, trying to construct a complete picture of the woman who'd given us both life, but who'd been forced to give him away. There was one photo of Dorothy at 16, young and beautiful and serious, taken maybe a year before Miles was born. He touched it gently, tracing her face with his finger. She looks sad, he said. Yeah, I agreed. She always looked a little sad. Miles told me more about his search over the years, how he'd tried to find his biological family in his 30s, hitting dead ends with sealed adoption records, how he'd done the DNA test on a whim 5 years ago, hoping against hope that someone would show up, how he'd almost given up believing he'd ever know where he came from. And then you appeared, he said, looking at me with something like wonder. After all this time, you just appeared. It felt like a miracle, he said, and I couldn't disagree. I asked him about Vietnam, the one topic we'd mostly avoided on the phone. He'd been drafted in 1968, same as me. We were both there during the Tet Offensive, though in different units, different parts of the country. We'd both come home to a country that didn't want to hear about what we'd seen, what we'd done, what had been done to us. We'd both spent decades trying to forget, trying to be normal, trying to pretend we hadn't left pieces of ourselves in the jungle. Talking to Miles about it was different than talking to anyone else, even other veterans. There was something about knowing we shared blood, shared history, shared this fundamental experience of being broken and rebuilt. He understood without me having to explain. I understood without him having to justify. He told me about his husband. They'd been together 35 years, married as soon as it was legal in California. I told him about Linda, how much I missed her, how strange it was to be old and alone after decades of partnership. We compared notes on our kids, our grandkids, the strange experience of watching the world change so much while we stayed fundamentally the same. We talked about getting old, about bodies that didn't work like they used to, about the friends we'd lost, about the fear and the freedom of knowing our time was limited. As the afternoon turned to evening, Miles reached across the table and took my hand. I spent my whole life wondering, he said, wondering who I looked like, where I came from, if anyone out there shared my blood, and now I know. Now I have a brother. His voice broke on the last word and I squeezed his hand. I spent my whole life thinking I knew my story, I said. Turns out I didn't know the half of it. Literally. We both laughed, and it felt good, felt right, felt like something that had been broken was finally being repaired. We made plans before we left that restaurant. Real plans, not just vague promises to stay in touch. Thanksgiving in San Francisco, Christmas in Ohio, regular video calls, a trip to our mother's grave that I'd visit 100 times but he'd never seen. We were going to make up for lost time, even though we both knew we couldn't really. 75 years is a lot of years to miss. But we were going to try. We were going to be brothers, even if we were starting late. Rebecca drove me back to the hotel and I was quiet, processing everything. She kept glancing over at me, worried. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. I thought about it. I'd spent the day discovering that my entire understanding of my family was incomplete. I'd learned that my mother had carried a secret her whole life, had given up a child and never spoke of it, had looked at me every day knowing I had a brother out there I'd never meet. I'd learned that I'd lived 75 years as an only child when I wasn't one. It should have made me angry, I guess. It should have felt like a betrayal, but it didn't. "I'm good," I told Rebecca. "I'm really good." And I meant it. Because yes, I'd lost 75 years with Miles, but I had him now. I had a brother. At 75, when I thought my life was basically over, when I thought I was just marking time until the end, I'd gotten this impossible gift, a second chance at family, a person who understood me in ways no one else could, because we were connected by blood and history and the strange circumstances that had kept us apart and then brought us back together. Miles and I talked on the phone 2 days after we got home. We were both still processing, still a little overwhelmed. "I keep looking at the pictures Rebecca took," he said. "I keep thinking this can't be real." "I know what you mean," I said. "I told my daughter about you. She cried. She's always wanted an uncle. Turns out she had one all along. We just didn't know. The randomness of it all, the sheer luck that we'd both decided to take DNA tests, that the technology had advanced enough to connect us, that we'd lived long enough to find each other. It was staggering. A few years earlier, and the tests wouldn't have been accurate enough. A few years later, and one or both of us might have been gone. We kept our promises. I flew to San Francisco for Thanksgiving, met Miles's husband Thomas, saw their life together, the home they'd built, the family they'd created. Thomas welcomed me like I'd always been part of their lives, and I felt the warmth of being included in something I'd never known I was missing. Miles came to Ohio for Christmas, met more of my extended family, saw where I'd grown up, visited Dorothy's grave with me. We stood there together in the cold December wind, 2 old men looking at a headstone that said beloved wife and mother, and I wondered what she'd think if she could see us, if she'd be happy we'd found each other, or devastated that it had taken so long, or some complicated mixture of both. "I think she'd be glad," Miles said quietly, like he was reading my mind. "I think she'd be glad we have each other now." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that wherever Dorothy was, whatever happened after we died, she knew that her sons had found each other, that the separation she'd been forced into hadn't been permanent after all. "I'm glad too," I told him. I'm glad you exist. I'm glad I know you. I'm glad we have this." He put his arm around my shoulders and we stood there together, two brothers, finally. It's been 8 months now since that first phone call, since my world expanded to include this person I should have known my whole life. Miles and I talk 3 times a week. We're planning a road trip for next summer, retracing some of our mother's life, trying to understand her story better. Rebecca and Miles's daughter have become friends, cousins discovering each other, the grandkids video chat. We're building something new out of something that was lost, creating a family that should have always existed. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry about the time we lost, about the secrets that were kept, about the decades we could have been brothers and weren't. And honestly, I'm not. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. Because I can't change the past. I can't go back and make Dorothy's life different. Can't make it so she didn't have to give up her first son. Can't rewrite history so Miles and I grew up together. All I can do is be grateful for now. Grateful that we found each other at all. Grateful that at 75 and 76 we get to be brothers. Grateful that my daughter bought me that DNA kit. Grateful for every phone call, every visit, every moment we have left. I spent most of my life thinking I understood my story. Turns out I was missing the most important chapter, but now I have it. Now I have him. My brother Miles. And whatever time we have left, we're going to spend it making up for everything we missed. Building the relationship we should have had all along, being the family we were always meant to be. Sometimes the best gifts come late. Sometimes you find what you need exactly when you're ready to receive it. Sometimes, even at 75, your life can surprise you, can expand in ways you never imagined, can give you something you didn't even know you were missing. That's what happened to me. That's what Miles gave me. A brother, a second chance, a new beginning at the end of everything, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.